final speaker, we have a product manager, writer, speaker, trainer, and musician. Is there anything you can't do? Currently working at a sustainability startup, Peter's expertise in modern product management is sought after at conferences across Europe. He is a contributor to the book 97 Things Every Java Programmer Should Know and co-authored Play for Scala. He's here to talk about zero bug policy success. So please put your hands together and give a warm welcome to Peter.
Thank you, everybody. So my name is Peter Hilton. I'm going to tell you a story today about team happiness. If you want to know more about me, I have a website. If you follow me on Blue Sky, that would make me happy. But otherwise, let's get on with it. My purpose for today is to tell you that zero bug policy success exists, at least once in one place. Who knows if there are more examples than that. I would also like to add that I think there are lots of points in this story where you may have questions, and I'm willing to give it a go to, stick your hand up in the middle of the talk, and I'll take a short digression for that. I'll limit it a little bit, but I think there's time. There are two rules, however. The first rule, the first sentence is a question. There is no second sentence. For me, the story started with this infographic by Jesper Sandman, who's an Agile coach in Stockholm. And this shows the process for a zero bug policy. So in theory, implementing a zero bug policy means implementing this process. You just fix the bug straight away, or you delete the bug report, and there is no third option. So how hard could it be? Now, I'd heard about this quite a few years ago. I'd had a conversation over coffee with colleagues and thought, wouldn't that be cool? But obviously, we're not allowed to do this. So we put it on the back burner. But this was really the starting point. And I'll come back to this later. But for me, this was the framing of this fix it now or delete it. Are there any Swedish speakers? Because the original is in Swedish. Well, if you learn nothing else today, I can reveal that the Swedish word for fix is fixa. It's handy to know. But let's move on about the naming. So one of the times I suggested on a team that we might have a zero bug policy, the then VP product got very upset that you can't have a zero bug policy. It was sort of controversial. He told me it was ridiculous. And I realized on reflection later that it's not a policy at all. So it should be obvious that nobody is claiming that we can not have bugs by policy. We can't have a policy that there will be no bugs. That's not what this means. In fact, it's a target, right? So zero bug policy is the wrong name for a bug management system, a system in the sense of the diagram on the infographic. So not software, but a way of working. And it's a system for achieving this target of zero bugs. So zero bugs is a goal that you can aim for. Maybe you'll even get there. Before I go further and tell you about that story, I do want to set the context because this is an experience report. I want to share what happened. I think it's useful to share concrete stories instead of speculation or supposing that it doesn't always depend. So I'm going to start with, who, what, and where, that stuff. So the who, this is a story about a fully remote, distributed team, not particularly large team. Not in the picture are the CTO and the part-time Agile coach. They were involved, but not day-to-day. So they helped, but I think in this story, the glory went to the developers because they did most of the work. I mostly sort of watched and encouraged as the product manager in the story. And as you can see, quite spread around several time zones. So distributed team, smallish team. What were we building? We were building a web shop launched in autumn 2023 for Norwegian consumers, mostly using mobile phones who would sort of pay on their telephone. Only a third were using desktop instead of mobile. Hardly any of them used this English version of the website that we maintained, but that was kind of handy for the development team. Now, the web shop is not the interesting part of what we were building. That's a fairly standard kind of software to solve. But because it's a circular service, the idea is, order containers of soap products, use them, and then send them back to us and clean and refill and reuse. So it's a reuse, circular supply chain thing. And that's where a lot of the interesting tech work was figuring out how to make this circular supply chain work. So we had a kind of a hard technical problem to work on as well. And then the company, so it's a startup, there were 20 people at the time with this sustainability mission. So we had a lot of alignment about what we were working on. That really helped us. It was a nice vibe, nice environment. So that's where we were. So fully remote team, consumer retail, sustainability, startup. This is very different to where most of you work, I expect. Lots of you work for much larger organizations or much older organizations doing different kinds of things. So the takeaway is that this is very small scale software development, doing new software, not much legacy of anything. Maybe that was important, who knows? Nobody knows. The next topic is this question of how did we get started with a zero bug policy? Where did this come from? Who's old enough to have read the Joel test, which is a blog post from 25 years ago? Nobody's that old. Wow, just me. This was a blog post by Joel Spolsky where he described 12 measures of the company you might be thinking about going to work as a software developer, aiming to kind of pin down what is sort of sensible or professional software development. Now, there's various sort of things going on there that at the time for many of us we already took for granted, like using source control. The idea that you would not use source control was already terrifying. But I kind of feel that none of us scored a point for always fixing bugs before writing new code. And so I sort of half remembered this, but I guess we didn't pay attention. We ignored the point that we were not getting. We scored most of the other points, but nobody got 12 out of 12. So I guess this was the first time I ever saw this idea of fixing the bugs first. I worked as a developer back in the day. And then I promptly forgot about it for quite a long time. It was 20 years later, in fact, in 2021, when I'd been having that conversation with colleagues, I discovered the fix it now or delete it infographic. And I wrote a blog post about how you do a zero bug policy. I mean, in theory, I'd never actually done it, but I wrote the blog post. It was, for me to clarify my thinking, and it helped me move on from this thing that I couldn't do. But I kind of, remembered it. Anyway, so let's fast forward to last year, because that's when things started to happen. Last year in January, the team in a retro kind of brought up this idea of maybe adopting a zero bug policy and shared my blog post on the Slack channel. I didn't actually work there yet, but I was sort of in the interview process. And so this had been shared. It was a topic of conversation. And it came back again a month later in another discussion. So the team was primed even before my first day. And my first day on the 1st of March last year included a retro where it kind of came up again. And this was great news. I thought, wow, could this be the time that I actually get to work on a team that implements a zero bug policy? This would be fun. Let's try it out. The timing was good. It turned out that the development team was surprised by the marketing department saying that they were going to launch a massive marketing campaign the next month in April, May. And the developers, so when I joined, were very worried about this because they said, well, the product's just not ready. I mean, the web shop kind of works, but not all the time, which is not great if you're planning to take customer orders, especially because the marketing campaign, television advert, public transport, billboard adverts, this was probably going to generate a lot of new traffic. I mean, that was the marketing team's experiment to find out, how many people would this bring. And we figured that we were going to get a lot of new bug reports because we didn't think that everything worked. So that's exactly what happened. Many bug reports, firefighting started, not particularly happy team and struggling to keep up. So at this point in the story, we were really feeling the pain of bugs. This was not an abstract thing. This was daily support requests, trying to keep track of what's been reported, having to have meetings about bugs which do not spark joy. I must say that was not the most fun part. And for me as the product manager on the team, I realized that I could not conduct product experiments with buggy software. That was not really going to do anything. Trying something to increase sales was not going to work if the checkout didn't work. People were just not going to buy anything, but not for the reason I was trying to test. So we were spending too much time on these support requests and keeping track. So we had the motivation, and this was a key part of what helped us get started. So at the time, we're talking about implementing a zero bug policy. I'm reading about it. I'm kind of going back into the topic again. Chanced upon this social media post from JB Rainsberger, who, on the sort of related topic of refactoring, said, "Well, why would we do this?" And he picked a different angle, which I felt applied a little bit to the idea of fixing bugs, as a way of expressing appreciation for each other's work. He says, reduce volatility in the marginal cost of features, which sounds like a complicated way of saying making development work predictable. But he then sort of, goes on to say that this is a socially acceptable way of expressing love in a work context. So while that's a slightly weird phrasing from a professional point of view, we did lean into this idea of showing our appreciation for each other as a team. That kind of thing is important on a remote team. We had a Slack channel called Appreciations, where we share our appreciations for each other. So this suggested another motivation for being interested in a zero bug policy, that this might be actually a way of showing good respect for each other's work. But again, speculation. We didn't know, but we were thinking about it a lot. Of course, when you think about things a lot, especially when there are developers in the room, you start overthinking things, and you start asking questions about corner cases and definitions. And before you know it, somebody's going to say, yeah, but what if we don't know if it's a bug or a feature? So this is adapted from Goiko's slide yesterday, where he raises this very question of how do you decide if it's a bug or a feature, and what is the difference? Now, in his story, the answer is, well, it depends who's paying for it. That's why it matters. But in our story, that's no different, because it's our team, it's our product. So it's the same organization paying for it and the same people fixing it in both cases. So this distinction for us did not matter. But this was one of many edge cases that slowed us down by trying to discuss it. There were many others. Developers would come up with many what-if questions in retros, in the sessions where we're starting to discuss, should we start with a zero bug policy? And we could answer these questions. We'd say, well, I suppose, if we have existing bugs, we'd fix them first before we have a zero bugs policy. And if things don't go quickly, then I guess we'd have to talk about that. And mostly we'd have to talk about it, right, if things weren't working. But this slowed us down. We weren't making any progress doing the thing. We were still talking about the thing. And we had that sort of, a sense of kind of anticipation, but no satisfaction yet that you're probably feeling right now, because I'm not actually talking about implementing the policy yet. I'm just still talking about getting started. So what helped? How do we get unstuck from these process discussions that were not going anywhere? We did two things. The first thing was to take that proverbial step back and think about our goals. What do we want to achieve? Does this feel like something that might get us there? So we wanted the predictable support and maintenance effort. We wanted to just stop wasting our time doing work we didn't want to have to do. We wanted to not be spending time on meetings about bugs. We wanted to be improving the software and getting new customers, making the team work. We also wanted the team happiness. And particularly what I cared about as product manager, less relevant to the rest of the team, is that I wanted meaningful product feedback when we make product improvements. I'd want to know if they achieved their goal. And I didn't want sort of negative results that weren't because it was a bad idea, but merely because the software was broken. So that was a kind of complicated thing. Anyway, so thinking about goals helped us look forwards. Where do we want to get to? Let's not overthink the details. The second thing that was clearly important is that this had to be safe to try. So we came from this culture of willingness to experiment, provided that we were comfortable that we could afford this experiment to fail drastically, that we would learn something useful, and that would be okay. So by reframing the zero bug policy as a safe experiment with a small initial backlog, we realized that we didn't have to answer all of the questions in advance. We could just start and see how it would go. And with this zero bug policy, the idea that we would fix the bugs first, as on the initial infographic, we could just stop doing that. There's nothing to roll back. We didn't need to reintroduce the bugs we'd fixed. That would be okay, right? So we could just sort of stop having a zero bug policy anytime we wanted. So realizing that this would be safe to try allowed us to just move forwards and stop overthinking what it would mean. So on the 1st of May last year, I think it was, in that middle of fixing things for the marketing campaign, in the middle of having lots of open bugs and support issues, we agreed as a team, okay, new agreement, we fix the bugs first. If there's a bug, fix the bug. We won't do any other work until further notice. So let me describe to you what that looked like. No questions so far? No. Cool. Getting started was complicated. You know, what I've just told you about over the last 5 minutes, it slowed us down, it was complicated. Once we decided to fix the bugs, everything got a lot simpler. You just fix the bugs. But of course, just in that sentence is doing a lot of work because fixing bugs is hard work. Indeed, the next phase, working on the bug workload, was hard. At this point, I had high hopes in this presentation that I would show a really interesting burn-up chart. The burn-up chart is not very interesting at all. But there are a couple of takeaways from this that I will point out. The first is that we started on the left with a fairly small number of open bugs, and that we were able to fix them month by month. So this is sort of monthly data. And it also shows that as we fixed bugs, we had more bug reports. So the first takeaway here is that fixing bugs causes bug reports, which sounds weird, but does make a lot of sense. It's worth reporting bugs if they're getting fixed. The fact that we were fixing things, especially fixing the important things, really encouraged customer support to tell us, everything the customers reporting that weren't working. At this point, I'm also reading the customer support requests as they come in. I mean, when I say reading them, they're in Norwegian, so I'm pasting them into a translation program. It was another year or so before I could read the Norwegian well enough. It also shows, this chart, that in the end, we fixed quite a lot of bugs. Over the course of 2024, last year, from January to December, we fixed about 250 bugs. I mean, that's a sort of arbitrary number, but it was many more than we started with. I think if we'd known at the start of the year how many bugs we were going to fix, we might have been a little bit less enthusiastic about launching into this activity. But that's the programmer's creed. We do these things not because they're easy, but because we thought they were going to be easy. So what happened next? This is a more interesting chart, I think. So let me break this down. The vertical bars are weekly data for the number of bugs we fixed that week. So that's a sort of a kind of output. What is the result of the work we were doing? And what that shows is that there was quite a lot of variation in how many bugs the team fixed per week. But it goes mostly between sort of 1, 2, or 3 up to 15 to 20 in a couple of cases. But these are smallish numbers. Remember, the team has, I think, 6 developers at this point. 5 because one of them worked on DevOps stuff rather than bug fixing work. From the point at which we started here in May and June, there was this marketing campaign running. So that was generating a lot of new traffic, a lot of feedback, a lot of customer activity, and we discovered a lot of bugs that we didn't know about before. So that's kind of why there were lots of bugs being fixed then. I'm not sure, maybe larger numbers included smaller to fix bugs. But the really important thing here is that in this 2-month period, for 2 months, as a team, we worked on nothing else. We only fixed bugs. This was a kind of surprising experience. It was hard work for the developers. And at the time, I was wondering how long we would keep this up. It turned out it was quite a good experience as well. I mean, this was a kind of sort of bonding experience for the team to be working together on this hard thing. And in 2 months, we made a lot of progress. And that was pretty much how long it took to fix all the bugs that customers were going to be impacted by. After 2 months, we got things much more under control. We still had bugs to fix, and we did continue fixing bugs, as you can see. That never really stopped. But from that point onwards, we switched to 50% of our effort. So what happened then in July and August is that the bugs to fix, we still wanted to fix all of them, but they were less impactful for customers. They were more likely to be cosmetic issues, quality issues, lower impact user experience issues. We still kept fixing them, but we had new product opportunities that seemed more impactful for our goal of growing number of customers. So for example, we started a fairly significant sub-project on adding a new login method that would help people sign up more easily. And that seemed to be also important for achieving our business goal. Now, what we were doing here was making our life more complicated, because when I say 50% focus on fixing bugs, that's kind of easy to state as that's what we're going to do. But immediately day to day, what does that mean? Is that every other issue? Is that half of the hours? Is it half of the developers? This was kind of complicated. So we mostly, I guess we sort of, we did vibe project management here and just sort of figured it out. So that 50% is a rough number. But it meant that we were doing both things. For me as product manager, it roughly meant that if I could see half and half mix of both things in progress, then I figured that we weren't neglecting either. Both things are in progress. To some degree, this meant that particular people focused on one kind of work for a week or more at a time. And that caused one of the bits of sort of negative feedback from the development team. So last August, one of the developers in a retro expressed that zero bugs policy pissed me off this week. I read this in the notes when I was preparing this presentation this year, and I could tell immediately who this was. So I asked him, I said, look, can you remember what you were thinking, what the context was for this comment back at the time? Because I couldn't remember the retro, it was months earlier. And he did remember. He remembered that he was working on this new login flow thing, and there was some critical bit of the work that only he was going to do it because he'd prepared the knowledge to use some technology to do this. But the zero bug policy meant that he needed to work on a bug next. And anybody else could have worked on the bug, but only he could do the login thing. And that annoyed him because he had to interrupt the higher impact thing he was working on and work on what, from his point of view, was a low impact bug. So it doesn't really matter how we resolve this or whether that was the right decision. It's important to notice that this did happen, but also this kind of friction maybe only happened this once. I couldn't come up with another example of this kind of friction. So we did get friction from the complexity of trying to mix types of work. I think it was reasonable to kind of stay on the policy until we'd made progress. But it did require constant sense checking and talking about it in the retrospectives all through this period. It absolutely helped that we had a very good Agile coach who would facilitate our retrospectives and that we would talk about this stuff. And make sure that we were comfortable as a team. So at this point, of course, August is a months later. We've been doing this for months, and it's dragging on a bit at this point. And maybe we're all getting a bit tired of fixing bugs. But it still felt like the right thing to do. I don't think at any point did anybody in the team suggest that actually let's just abandon the zero bug policy. It's not worth it. So this was also a surprise that we stuck with it. Because it did seem to be working, we did seem to be getting benefit from it. So after the 50% focus on fixing bugs period, we eventually, end of August last year, got to zero bug day. Zero bug day was a big celebration because we never knew if we'd get there. We had for the first time 0 open bugs, 0 known bugs. And we knew that this wouldn't last, like potentially within hours there would be a bug report, but we'd achieved some new state. And from that point onwards on the chart, things change a little bit. I've just realized I didn't tell you what the line is. The line is monthly data for the number of open bugs on the first day of the month. So, there were times when we had, 1 month we had 16 open bugs, which is not a huge number. It's not a bug backlog of thousands of bugs or anything. But again, this is very new software, so there was no legacy, no excuse, if you like. But after that, we got that, the beginning of each month started with a lower and lower number of bugs every time. And from this point onwards, 1st of September, a few days after achieving 0 bugs for the first time, notice it's not at 0, so there's been a bug reported already within a few days. But it stays below 5 at this point. And so this period from here, this is the success that I'm talking about today, that we achieved this period that I called zero bug policy success, because this is where we got to achieve our goals. This is the destination that we were going for. After those months of hard work, we got to a new state of the development work, of the product development work and the product management. So this was only until the end of last year. So let's stretch out the axis to since zero bug day up until a couple of months ago on the same scale. And what's immediately obvious is that there are way fewer bugs involved. We've fixed bugs most weeks. Some weeks there were no bugs to fix. We got down to 0 bugs again, coincidentally on the first day of the month, otherwise some other point during the month. And then from March onwards, more consistently at 0 bugs. There was a little bit less development capacity from the start of this year, so there's a little bit less going on, so that distorts the data a little bit. It's not that accurate. But this was a very different feel. This was a very different experience to have, so many fewer bugs. I can tell you another sort of story about the data here. There are many different kinds of bugs, different levels of impact. So one of the questions that I wanted to consider was, how many of these bugs were critical bugs, bugs that we would stop work for? When I said, we work on bugs first, that means that the next task that a developer will start work on will be a bug fix if there's an open bug. Does not mean that a bug report will cause anybody to stop what they're working on. That would be disruptive. So we didn't do that. Unless it was a critical bug. If customers couldn't give us their money, then we would stop what we're doing. So we had 3 critical bugs in that category in this 12-month period from sort of May onwards when we started doing this. When we get a critical bug, then somebody's going to drop what they're doing and start working on this. And because FOMO, then before you know it, it's a team programming session and the whole team is in this video call and we're working on this bug together, which is also great because that helps you resolve the issue super quick. We didn't have anything we couldn't fix. We didn't have anything we couldn't fix reasonably quickly. So we did have a few critical bugs, but 3 out of 161 in that year it's not such a large number. Another way of breaking down the data is how many did we delete instead of fixing? So again, on the infographic, it's are we going to fix the bug immediately or are we going to pretend we didn't see it and ignore it? And when you do this, you do not mark it won't fix. You really just delete it. You don't keep any record. Because if you mark it won't fix, you'll be tempted to sort of look at it again. But really getting rid of this is what saves you from future bureaucracy and meetings. You don't ever want to review the won't fix bugs. It's very helpful to make that not possible by having deleted them. Future you will thank you. Turned out we didn't do this very often. So 9% of those 161 bugs were deleted. Actually, no, that's not quite true. 161 were fixed, the green bit. An additional 16 we didn't fix. And I browsed through those 16 when I was looking at this, and half of those actually were just duplicates. So it's not that we deleted it because we didn't want to fix the thing. We did fix it, but we already had the report. So a handful, just not a particularly significant number. And I think what's going on there, to reflect on the experience, was once we got to 0 bugs and that 0 bug policy success period, I could afford to be quite generous as a product manager about what we'd fix. Pretty much anything we would fix by default. We didn't have a discussion every single time, should we fix it? We would just fix it. It was only by exception that somebody would say, wait a minute, should we really fix this? And that was rare. It didn't come up much. So there's the product manager test, which is, would I as a product manager be embarrassed to tell a customer that this is a known issue? I would rather fix the bug than suffer that embarrassment. Does it slow any customer down on us achieving our business goals? We'd definitely fix that. Would it make the software better? Would it make the designer or the developers more proud of their work? We'll fix those too. So, this was a positive outcome, this opportunity to show more appreciation for each other's work by doing good work, showing appreciation for the designer's work by implementing the design properly, for example. Let me show you one more view on the data. What does a typical month look like? So this is May, relatively recently. The emojis show the maximum number of bugs open on any particular day. Most of the days, that was 0 bugs, smiley face. Apart from that, it was either 1 bug or 2 bug. So what you're seeing here is that on the 2nd of May, there was a bug reported, and we didn't fix it until early next week, which was not super fast, but it was fast enough, I guess. Another one a week later, fixed the next day, and then later in the month, 2 bugs at the same time. But again, typically fixed within a couple of days. So bugs came and went fairly quickly. Mostly there were no bugs. This is a very uncomplicated situation. There's no bug backlog here. You just talk about the bug because there's either none or there's one in most cases. Sometimes it took a while to fix it because we'd be waiting 6 days for code review, which made me feel a little bit uncomfortable. But I think that's a whole other conversation. Why does that happen? I think developers like to block on code review more than I would like them to as a product manager, but that's another talk. If you figured out how to solve that, please talk to me afterwards. I'd love to know. I would also like to share a bit about how we work. So we're a startup. We're using Slack and Notion as our main tools here. One of the things that was helpful here is that we wanted to lower the barrier for bug reports, especially as we didn't have very many. We wanted to make sure that we were catching everything because 0 bug reports might mean that we're just not getting the bug reports, not hearing about it. So one of the things that worked well for us was we had an internal Slack channel called Bugs, and we asked everybody in the company, if you think something might be a bug, post there. We're not going to be precious and ask that you write a well-formed bug report because that would increase friction. So what we instead did was we had a rota among the product development team for being the product support who would be the first responder for bug reports. So you do this for a week at a time and let your work be interrupted by posts in the bug channel. Respond, gather information, see if you can reproduce it, typically create a bug report. I don't really like the word ticket, but that's the emoji we have. So the 3 emoji, the eye is the ticket and the done, would then use as a reaction emoji to communicate our sort of status on the bug report. We only used a Notion database board view as our tracker. We didn't need any fancy tool. We did make a separate Kanban board column for bugs. This made them really visible. That column was mostly empty and in fact hidden. And when it was there, this sort of red column, it would be very clear that there's a bug. It wasn't just something at the top of a column of things. Something that's also important here is, I'm going to have to explain it, but I've called it an air-gapped separate product feedback database. So while having a very small backlog, so there's a bit of screenshot at the bottom here with numbers that you can't really read, but this first column, this ready for work column, is kind of our backlog. And the fact that it has 15 items in it in this screenshot is kind of a big number. Normally there would be less than 10 things in the backlog. We'd really add these late. So having a small backlog was a bit like, for normal work, was similar to having very small bug backlog as well, typically of 0 or 1 or 2 bugs. But of course, there's lots of other kinds of product feedback, and people have ideas, and everybody's got an idea about something you should add to your product. As product manager, I did want to capture all of that. So as an aside, I had a completely separate feedback database. And what I mean by air-gapped is that there was absolutely no automation to put things from product feedback into the developer backlog. We're not building up a backlog of things that somebody thought was a good idea. That's not a good enough reason to put it in the backlog. So that's sort of part of how we were working. But I think the really important takeaway here is that once you get this few bugs, you do not need a bug tracker. If we were in person in a room, then post-it notes on a whiteboard would be plenty complicated enough, for 0, 1, or 2 red post-it notes. I could use red or orange for bugs or something like that. Anyway, so we got to 0 bugs by fixing them, not by tracking them, and certainly not by having meetings about them. In talking about this, lots of questions have come up. And I'd just like to address some of those now because you're all being very shy. So I could have skipped this session, but I don't know, maybe the cake is still digesting. I've mentioned that we do not define the bugs. Turns out you don't need a written definition. And the important thing here is that it's because we evaluate one at a time. And that comes up again and again. You don't need rules or flowcharts or processes for a thing when you just have one. You just deal with that one thing. It's much simpler. Of course, I kind of like Nicholas Smith's definition that there are no bugs. There are only surprise features. Another question was, what if we'd had a different starting situation where there'd been this really bug? Oh, is that a question? Sorry, I can't see the hands very well because of the lights.
Yeah, two questions really related to the deleted reported bugs. So number one, how do you report back to the customer that you've deleted these bugs and you're going to fix them? The answer may answer the second one.
Okay, so shall I answer that first, or do you want to?
You may be able to deal with it in one. The
Okay.
second part is how do you prevent the bugs being reported repeatedly?
Okay, so there are two questions here. The first question is, how do we report back to customers about the status of bugs that we've fixed or not fixed or ignored? In this context, we just didn't. This is online consumer retail. We're selling to consumers. So if a consumer is reported as a support request that something didn't work for them, from the development team point of view, there's no flow back. When this is not like a consulting situation where you have a much more direct relationship with the customer, where you're having meetings with them and you have to report back. Now, that's not the full story because, of course, customer support is talking to them. Customer support is looking at our bug Slack channel, and they'd see when we would mark a thread there as done with the green tick, and I'd often post in there that a fix for this is now deployed in production. So in practice, they might then email the customer and say, hey, thanks for the bug report again. By the way, this is fixed now. Now, I don't know for sure how much they did that. And it's worth noting that might not have been particularly relevant for the customer anyway, because the customer ordering frequency was maybe once every 3 months. So if the customer had failed with something, as long as they completed their order, they wouldn't really care if we'd fixed it or not. So great question, but in this context, a little bit less important. Now, the second question is also interesting. The second question is, what if we delete a bug report because we decide we're not going to fix it for whatever reason, and then it comes back? Note that we deleted the bug report and we don't have anything written down, so we may or may not remember it coming back, right? Now, teams vary a lot about how stable they are, and opinions vary a lot about the pros and cons of stable teams. Just so happens in this case, we had a very stable team. In practice, given the smallest size of the team, the smallest size of the development, and our sort of focus on working on quite specific things, we were probably going to remember when that happened. I think in my case, indeed I would, and it would be very easy to at least search the bugs channel. So while I might have not created a bug report and ignored it and said in the bugs channel, yeah, whatever, no, but more politely than that, I might go back and find that thread and say, did this thing come up? Search for the keyword. Even if we didn't remember it, sort of still wouldn't matter because we'd make the decision again the next time. And I think if, it does kind of matter how long has it been since the last time this bug was reported, but not so much, because if it was not this week, then this is infrequent. If something is kind of affecting lots of people, it's just going to come back straight away. So I think in practice, without overthinking it, if there was some scenario where something came up a lot, we'd notice straight away. And from my memory, that didn't really happen. So that wasn't really an issue. And it makes sense. Oh, actually, that's another question. It makes sense that it wouldn't really happen because we didn't do this very often, this deleting the bug report. Usually we fixed it. So to not fix it and have it come back would be a coincidence. So again, we didn't have to overthink this or answer this question in advance. We just had to discover that it was not so much of a problem in practice. Another question there first.
Do you have an example of a deleted bug?
Do I have an example of a deleted bug? I don't. It would be some kind of edge case, something where we don't think this is going to affect anyone in the next 6 months, or maybe ever. That would be if we agreed it was a bug, but we really didn't think it was going to come back. Another example, which I think was more likely, and again, this is such a small number, I'm not even sure how many times, we had some dependencies on third-party services, like a third-party payment service that would occasionally just not work. So, and it was often difficult to figure out if a customer reported that their order wasn't placed, they said, I did the order, but I didn't get my stuff. Probably they actually didn't complete the order, and we've got some UX issue. But maybe they did complete the order, but the payment didn't work properly because the payment service was down, and there's no way we could figure out, whether that's what actually happened. So we probably would be deleting, bug reports where we can't convince ourselves that this really was a bug. Although mostly we had time to investigate whether that was the case. So again, smallish numbers, not too much of a problem in practice, but a relevant question, what kind of things. If there'd been enough of them, I would have done an analysis, product management. It'd be super interesting, but I didn't, so no slide, sorry. Okay, so you've got follow-up questions, but there was a question here-ish first. Oh, no, you first.
I want to ask the team on this particular occasion, they focused on doing a lot of defect fixes, but did you guys focus on doing any kind of more stringent testing at the earlier level in terms of unit testing, testing, integration testing, that kind of stuff? Or was it just all focused on bug fixes? That was the first bit. And the second thing I was just going to ask is, the team looks like they've spent a significant amount of time doing bug fixes here, but I'm guessing that must have had to be signed off from product management or portfolio or CEO level, because there's an opportunity cost to everything, right? So if they're spending this much time doing defect fixes, it means that capacity or resources can't be used on other things.
Yeah, okay, so let me answer the first question, which was there lots of additional effort on testing, for example? Predicted that question? No? What can I say? Oh, yeah. I'll show you the answer. Why doesn't it work? Fail. Technology fail. There we go. When I discussed this with the developers afterwards, I had this question because I didn't have access to the code. I didn't look at the source code. Might have been tempted. They said, well, yeah, of course. I mean, obviously, why do you think it took 5 months to fix all the bugs? That's because we added a lot more test coverage. So one of the earlier problems, and the fact it was buggy in the first place, is that there was not good test coverage. And it was pretty clear from our discussions when we went into this that we were not interested in quick fixes. That wasn't going to help us. That wasn't going to get us to the zero bugs thing. So all of the bugs were fixed, let's call it properly. And as a result, test coverage went way up, and a lot of other things went along with that in the end. There were changes to how we did releases. There were changes to end-to-end testing, not just kind of local unit testing. So there was a lot of that. The other question you asked, so you sneakily got in there with 2 questions, was what about how about prioritization for business stakeholders? Now, the good news here is that the product manager was me. So product manager sign-off was me. And at no point did any of the other management team ever want to have a conversation with me about bugs. So it simply didn't come up. If it had, I'm sure I would have been able to deal with them and say, you don't really want to talk about bugs. That's not interesting. Let's talk about our business metrics. But that's hypothetical because it just didn't happen. So we were good. Did you have a question as well? Yeah.
Yeah, I think similar-ish though. You had a solid 2 months, all hands on deck fixing bugs.
Yes.
Are there other team members that aren't necessarily on the front lines doing that, like designers and what are you doing to spread work out whilst maybe you're in that crisis sort of thing?
Yeah, so the question is, during the kind of solid 2 months of only working on fixing bugs, what were some of the other team members doing? Indeed, product manager and designer didn't have as much to do for fixing the bugs. I did a bit of more work with the customer support to help them than I normally would. The designer had a lot of space, kind of a luxury to really look at discovery work on the next solution we did. And that's also maybe an influence from why we started after 2 months working on the next opportunity, because at this point the designer had figured out, hey, here's this big opportunity for something next we could work on. So it wasn't a huge problem. And in fact, even if we were sitting on our hands because there was nothing to do, that wouldn't have necessarily been wrong. I mean, fixing bugs, I think, was the critical bottleneck in progress as a team. So not a problem either way. We do still have time for more questions. There were, I don't know what order they were in, but you first.
Would there be like a difference in how you treat, say, customer bugs to like customer feature requests, being a small feature, obviously?
Is there a difference to how we treated bugs versus feature requests? So in this context, our customers didn't really make feature requests. I mean, they'd contact customer support and say things like, hey, you sell this laundry detergent, but why don't you sell fabric softener? And that's not really a feature request for the software. They might say, give feedback where we thought, oh, that's obviously a problem with the web shop or with how our supply chain implementation was working. So from their point of view, they wouldn't have called it a feature request, but they would report it as a problem. And again, is that a bug or a feature from our point of view? Doesn't matter. It's just an opportunity. So I didn't really need to answer that question in practice. Next question was there.
Was it worth it?
Was it worth it to fix all the bugs? Unambiguously, yes, absolutely. So let me come back to that because I've got a few conclusion slides. But that's your spoiler question.
Yeah. What would you have done if you started with hundreds of bugs?
That's such a common question. I've got a slide for that. So here we go. We would have considered the nuclear option. Who knows what the nuclear option is? Yes, who was in Christopher May's presentation yesterday? Just delete all of the bugs, all of the bug backlog. I mean, it's kind of funny to talk about, and it usually gets a bit of a nervous laugh, but as a thought experiment, it's really quite exciting because, yeah, either you'd get fired or it would just be much better. I think the trick would be to figure out a safe to try way of doing this. So let's say, hypothetically, and I'm not telling you to do this on Monday, but I'm not telling you not to do it. Suppose you're using Jira to track bugs, and there are hundreds of them. What you could do, maybe, in Jira, is to create a new Jira project with the same kind of structure, and then move all of the bugs to that project, and then tell everybody you've deleted them all, and they're totally gone. And in the new project, nobody else has access, only you. And if they say, oh, you're fired, you can say, no, just kidding, put them back. But I think this is a real option, because part of the benefit we got from fixing all the bugs is that we didn't have a backlog to cause meetings. And removing the cause of meetings is a really important factor in increasing the team happiness in all aspects of software development. So this is a key opportunity. So yeah, delete the backlog. How are we doing? So I'm gonna switch back to just the last few slides because there might still be time for questions or there might not. I do want to share a bit about the lessons we learned here for the last bit of the session. I've got until 5:30, right?
No, it was 5:15.
Sorry, they said I had 60 minutes. I apologize. Okay, so there is cake, but let's do it quickly. So I've already said that dealing with things case by case is a very strong reason to consider this worth it. That simplifies a lot of your life. You don't need to plan things in advance, you just deal with it as it comes up. I realized in hindsight that there's some subtle stuff going on with this infographic. It's cute and has a cute cartoon bug, and that's to make it feel unthreatening and safe. But actually, this is difficult to do, it turns out. And I think quick kind of reflection, decades of progress in Agile software development is that we've massively simplified how we approach problems like this. And this is a very simple solution that requires tough conversations to implement. So this is difficult, requiring tough conversations, but it's simple. So there's clever misdirection going on here. And I promise I noted before this week that it was clearly the Agile practitioner, Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, who said that it seems that perfection is attained not when there is nothing more to add, but when there is nothing more to take away. Anyway, so we also figured out that the infographic only works after you reach 0 bugs. And we didn't know how long it was going to take to get there. We knew that was going to be tough. I do wonder if this would work for you, because I don't know anything about your organizations, but probably you can't do this because you don't have the pain we had of those bugs, or maybe you wouldn't get away with fixing or deleting the whole bug backlog or fixing all of them. Maybe you don't care enough about the buggy releases, and maybe your product manager doesn't really care about whether the product experiments are meaningful. Maybe it's performative product management. Could be a thing. And maybe you've got sales marketing who are just asking you for new features and you're not able to do anything else. So that could be an issue. After all of this, a few weeks ago, I read this book, which in hindsight would have helped me a lot. This is about how you implement change. So I absolutely recommend this. The hardest part was the transition. This would have made the transition a lot easier because there are some very concrete takeaways from how to do change management here. I don't have time to tell you, so you'll have to read the book. So the summary is that it was hard to get started. It required the whole team, but we had the motivation to do it. There were lots of questions, and what was more important was just starting. And once we got to 0 bugs, everything got easier, and that absolutely made it worth it. In hindsight, would do again, 10 out of 10, recommend, particularly because we stopped having to talk about bugs. So that's it. Sorry for going over time. That's a miscommunication about the session length. Please rate the talk with the QR code. And if you have even more questions, I'm still here, although I might be heading towards cake because I missed that earlier. Anyway, thank you very much.